The field of Mars, where mothers come to mourn the loss of their children in combat. Live from Lviv, Ukraine, on this episode of Ukraine Story Podcast. Hello, this is Doug, and I'm here live from Lviv, Ukraine, with honor, having just finished one of our first big days in the field, working on documentaries and journalism for Ukraine Story. Honor, it's been a big day. We've seen a lot, we've felt a lot, we've experienced a lot. I want to kind of walk us through some of the great experiences, because we not only walked through and sort of toured this magnificent city of Lviv, this ancient city of Lviv, but we took a look at the different historical epics. Most importantly, we followed the people of Lviv into their church services. We talked to them about their feelings and emotions, and we ended the day in what was probably one of the most emotionally powerful experiences in all my years in the field. Absolute top. Absolutely incredible.
Where we finished up was at a military cemetery, which has come to be known as the Field of Mars. Obviously, the reference is Mars, the god of war. And you'll find these all over Ukraine, and their visual characteristics are you can spot these from a long distance away by the hundreds of Ukrainian flags flying all over these cemeteries. And these are particularly special because these are cemeteries that often have sprung up since the war began, and the one here in Lviv is a really fantastic example of it. One thing which is true all over Ukraine, but we got a really special insight today, was how the mothers, the fathers, the wives, and the children of these soldiers who have died in the war since the February 24 invasion, they come every day to the burial site, sometimes multiple times a day. I spoke to several of them, and they explained how a lot of people who haven't lost relatives don't get it. But for them, these people were their lives, and this fight was the fight for their future and for their family. So how can they not return every day, even if it's only for 5 minutes, to spend time with their loved one? Sometimes they were lost a month ago, sometimes it was a year ago at the beginning of the invasion, but really a striking image of the difficulty of war on family and on the people here in Ukraine.
Visually, it takes your breath away. First of all, you're walking up to a field which has historically been a gravesite going back close to 100 years. It was, at one point in time, a gravesite of Ukrainians and Poles from past wars. But when the Soviets came, they disinterred the bodies, got rid of them, and turned it into a Soviet gravesite. Well, that came to end many decades later, and the Ukrainians today use it to bury the victims of Russian aggression. These are the best and the brightest, the people from Lviv primarily, or people that ended up in Lviv hospitals who went out and fought typically on the east and lost their lives. Here's what you see when you walk up to the Field of Mars. First of all, it's a sea of flags, all different colors. The Ukrainian flag, yes, of course, but also unit flags, battalion flags. And then each grave is set up above the ground and typically is covered with fresh flowers, covered with images of the deceased, letters that are placed there, sometimes urns, lights, such that at nighttime, by the time the sun goes down, the entire graveyard is lit up by thousands of lights and candles which are on the graves. Sometime, I don't know, maybe at 4 o'clock, there seems to be this movement of people. It's the end of the day, they're coming out, and you see young wives, women in their early 20s who lost a husband. You see sisters, you see brothers, maybe a girlfriend, and they're out there, and they will sit for hours looking at the picture, holding hands with the friends that they may have brought with them. The people who just grab your attention and your heart just falls to the ground are the mothers. The mothers sit, and you just feel through their emotions and the pain. As one woman said to me, who was the mother of a hero of Ukraine, which is the highest award which is given by Ukraine, She said, we talk about this here, and there's life before the war, and there's life after the war. There's life before my son was killed, and there's life after my son was killed. And very few people can fully understand the experience. So they've sort of built this kind of family relationship of wanderers, parents and families that wander into this field of Mars at the end of the day to share their own personal pain, their own personal grief. And there's a certain solidarity that they feel, because the same people that are there today, they're going to be back there tomorrow, and they're going to be back there the day after that, because they're committed for the rest of their lives to perpetuating and remembering the memory of their child or their husband or the person that they loved.
Another thing that really popped out to several people who we've spoken to, and specifically there at the cemetery, is the super clear understanding of what the sacrifice was for. So if you ask any one of these mothers, fathers, girlfriends, wives, why are you here? They give a couple answers, but after they explain their love and they want to remember, then speaking to us as Americans, one of the things which we keep hearing is this sacrifice means something. There's no way we're just going to bury them and then forget we're still in the middle of this fight, and we cannot let the loss of our loved one go to waste. And there's a real sense of, I wouldn't say it's a fear, but there's a real awareness that there's a moment here, and they do not want to let the sacrifice of these people be wasted by a loss in the war or by defeat. So even though these parents and these wives, they're not combatants right now, but they feel incredibly involved in this war, and their part after they lost their loved one is carrying on the memory and explaining to people why they died.
Well, let's get into some of the moments we had. There were two people in particular we spent time with. The first was actually a couple, and I'm not going to give their names on this radio broadcast, but I'm going to describe them. Their circumstances are incredibly moving, incredibly gripping. I was there with our cameras, and you're really careful about walking up to folks. This is their private moment of grief, and you want to respect that. And so typically what we do is we'll walk up to them, we'll approach them, just ask them about their son, in some cases their daughter, and just talk to them, then explain what we're trying to do. And if they have an interest in sharing the story of their child, then we want to capture it. One thing we learned is that for a long time they've been quiet, filled with such grief they haven't been able to speak. But for those who have now been living with that for 4 months or 6 months, in some cases a year or longer, they're not only ready to talk, there's a form of therapy that comes from being able to talk and tell the story of their son. In 2 significant cases today, I would ask a single question. 45 minutes later, they would stop talking. It was a constant stream. And the moms would take out their iPhones and say, here is the picture of this. Here's the picture of that. I think what made this first couple, a mother and a father, just so deeply moving and memorable was the intimacy of the conversation that they shared with us. Their son, famously, was a member of the Azov battalion who fought to the very last moment in one of the most epic and significant battles of the 21st century, which is the Battle of Mariupol. And his holding out, the pains that he suffered, he lost both of his eyes, his ability to see in the course of the battle, and then his death, his remarkable death, were things that she meticulously and carefully told in Ukrainian to us. We had a translator who translated. And I have to say, you want to be able to listen and just be very professional. Speaking only for myself, I was just drenched in tears, absolutely drenched in tears listening to the story.
Another one of the mothers we spoke to was a woman who was very clearly deeply affected, and she was just sitting very quietly by this gravestone for her son. And after talking to her for about an hour, we had the same experience here with multiple different people, where you just ask them a couple questions and it's like they've been longing to tell someone, they've been longing to get it out. As a foreigner, to be able to be sort of a third ear to hear, I think it's a very therapeutic moment. But one story which I thought was really interesting was this particular woman we spoke to. Her son had received the highest order in Ukraine, which is the title of Hero of Ukraine, for deeds he did on the front line, where he ended up saving he was an officer, and he ended up saving his whole unit by taking fire, and he ended up dying for it, and he got this award. But one of the things she said to me was, she explained how when he was at the front, they had specific times set for when he would message her and just say, "Hey mom, I'm okay." And she said that she learned that she could never message him. She could never initiate the messaging because she didn't want to set his phone off during an airstrike, or she didn't want to alert the Russians as to where he was if they were watching the cell towers. So he would message her once in the morning and once in the evening, and he would say, "Hey mom, I'm okay." Well, eventually the messaging stopped because he died. But as she explained this to me, it was one of those moments that, only a mom can convey that way. But it was both pride she had in her as well as deep loss. But that whole story stuck in my head of, your son is on the front, not just on the front, but he's leading men every morning. "Hey mom, I'm okay." Every evening, "Hey mom, I'm okay." And then that stops. And then you get in touch with the guys he served with, and you hear the whole story of what happened. And that is one story of tens of thousands, but I think it's illustrative of the kinds of stories you see all over Ukraine.
She's flipping through her phone to show us pictures. And one of the things we realize is that he's a twin. He has a twin brother, an identical twin. They look exactly like each other. And the twin, of course, was going to go off to war, especially after this happened, and the decision was made. She said, "I can only lose one son. I can't lose both sons." So he ended up staying back. But he had a beautiful wife, a beautiful daughter, and she walked us through. Here's their engagement. Here's their marriage. Here's the little girl when she was born. Here it is when she went to church at this age. Here she is at that age. Here she is now, laying flowers on her father's grave. Here she is coming to her father's tomb, remembering her father, honoring her father. I mean, it's just enough to make your heart explode. This little girl was 5 years old when she lost her dad. And, of course, it's now their family ritual. Every day they're going to see each other. Every day they're going to be there by the grave. Every day they're going to remember, put fresh flowers, remember his face, maybe twice a day. The pain that this woman was experiencing was simply palpable. The loneliness, the wonder of what does the future world look like. But as we closed our conversation with her, this fire sort of began to well up within her heart, and she began to say, "We must win this war. We need your help. The world is on the line. We must persevere against the Russians. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for helping us." And she was speaking to me as an American, not as my person, but as an American. The couple that we met, the couple whose son died as a member of the Azov battalion at the conclusion of the Battle of Mariupol, had a story which was the stuff of movies. But imagine a mother describing in detail by detail the process of her son being shot, having fireballs come down and render his eyes useless, walking around with the bandages over his face while he's still trying to protect the people around him in the basement of a building that's receiving massive shelling from the Russians, speaking with his friends as they realize that the Russians are coming in and they're not going to live, they're not going to make it. And the story concluded with a real shocker. I mean, you don't often get a shocker in war because everything is so life and death. But here is her son at this penultimate moment in this battle, with the Russians just yards away, ready to come in and to take them captive. And he turned to his partner there, and the two of them said, "Well, we will not allow the Russians to take us captive. We will not allow that. And we cannot, in moral conscience, commit suicide. We need another option. Let's hold pistols at each other and shoot the other person to deny the Russians entrance." And they did exactly that. And when the Russians burst through to take them, they had both departed this earth. As the mother is telling me this story, she's also walking me through actual videos of the last 48 hours because her son is sending her pictures of him with fire around him, hunched up against the wall. While the bombs are going off, he's sending her pictures as if to say, "I'm not going to make it out, Mom. I want you to know because I want the story to be remembered. And I have to say, journalists in the field, soldiers themselves, you don't often see a situation where a mother is able to not only verbally but visually walk you through the last steps. She pulled out a picture and said, these are the 7 people that were with him. There were 3 girls, there were these men, there was this, all these people, they all died. Here's what it looked like. Here's where the fire was. Here's him talking to me. And I was able to actually listen to the audio of what it sounded like in those final moments. Simply incredible. And the steely heart, the mettle, the courage that this woman and her husband had. I turned to the husband and I asked him, do you have any other children? And he said, yes, I had a son and he died 2 years ago. So here's this couple. They've lost both their children. And today their life is spent, and certainly in a significant portion, honoring the memory of the son that they love so very much.
One of the striking points to me, with really all the Ukrainians I've met who have had loss in their families, where family members have died, I have worked with vets from the Iraq War and from the Afghanistan War, and many dozens and dozens of veterans from the Second World War. And the response that these Ukrainian families have had to loss is slightly different from what I've heard in America. The response is, on one hand, deep, deep grief, because the families here are very close. And on the other hand, it is absolute clarity when they tell these stories, and absolute firmness in the pride and the love they have for their family members. There's, even as, they may shed a tear or weep at the beginning or at the end of the story, these mothers and these fathers and these loved ones, as they're telling you the most painful parts, they tell us this with a steely resolve, with a almost with the sense of, you have to know this. I have to tell you this. This is important. You need to hear this. And what happens on my end is I go from almost wanting to console someone to being the message bearer for that story, because there's a sense in which they are passing on the story to you. And this is an experience I've had many, many times now, and it's really remarkable to me. This idea of, on the one hand, incredible grief, and on the other, great pride, great love, and the real need for passing these stories on so that the sacrifice is not forgotten.
We thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Ukraine Story podcast. Ukraine Story is a nonprofit organization dedicated to journalism and to documentary reporting in the field. If you want to learn more about us, go to www.ukrainestory.org. We thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you on our next episode.